The family that made the world addicted to sugar, the Tate and Lyle families. The story of Tate and Lyle begins in 1859 when Henry Tate opened a small sugar refinery in London. He started selling sugar that was cheaper and more accessible than anyone else at the time. Sugar was considered a luxury, a treat only for the rich, but Tate changed that forever. Around the same time, Abram Lyle was running a refinery in Greenock, Scotland, producing golden syrup from leftover sugar byproducts. Both families were ambitious, and they soon became rivals in the sugar industry. Henry Tate's vision was not just to sell sugar, but to dominate the market. He built massive refineries along the Thames River and created an efficient production system. The Industrial Revolution helped him scale, using new machines and steam power to refine sugar faster than ever. Abram Lyle focused on perfecting golden syrup, which became a staple in British households. These two families were smart about branding, making their names synonymous with sugar. Tate even used philanthropy to gain public favor, donating money to libraries and schools. Lyle's syrup became a household product because of clever marketing that made it seem wholesome and family-friendly. By the early 20th century, both companies were expanding across the British Empire. They were supplying sugar to colonies like India, the Caribbean, and parts of Africa. Cheap labor and colonial exploitation were part of their supply chain, although few people ever noticed. They profited immensely while making sugar accessible and desirable worldwide. At the same time, health warnings about sugar were emerging, but the families used lobbying and sponsorships to maintain their reputation. Sugar research was often funded or influenced to downplay risks like obesity and diabetes. Their influence extended to governments, schools, and nutrition organizations. It was a calculated strategy to protect profits while keeping society hooked. Countries importing sugar were encouraged to industrialize it into processed foods, further embedding sugar into diets. Tate and Lyle diversified into sweeteners and processed ingredients, ensuring that their products touched almost every packaged food. The global reach meant that sugar consumption became culturally normalized everywhere. Celebrations, holidays, and daily meals were all designed around sweetness. Public perception framed sugar as harmless fun, masking the long-term health crises it caused. Their marketing genius turned addiction into tradition, making sugar a central part of human life. Children grew up craving it, parents unknowingly reinforced it, and governments promoted it indirectly. The Tate and Lyle families were orchestrating a system where desire, culture, and economics all reinforced sugar consumption. By the late 20th century, sugar had become one of the most profitable commodities in history. They had created an empire that not only sold a product, but reshaped global habits. The hidden costs, from health epidemics to colonial labor exploitation, were enormous. Yet the families maintained a public image of philanthropy and national contribution. The world was addicted, and the Tate and Lyle families had done it, quietly, strategically, and effectively. The Tate and Lyle families didn't just rely on marketing, they understood the science of sugar. Early research hinted that sugar triggered pleasure centers in the brain, creating cravings similar to mild addiction. This knowledge allowed them to formulate products that were not only sweet, but irresistible. Breakfast cereals, candies, and syrups were engineered to hit that perfect balance of sweetness. They also funded studies to confuse the public about sugar's negative effects, emphasizing fat or other foods as the real problem. Children were especially targeted with colorful packaging, mascots, and promises of energy or happiness. Families trusted the brands, believing that Tate and Lyle were providing nourishment, not a hidden danger. The chemical makeup of sugar ensured that people wanted more after each bite, and these companies understood that instinctively. They turned food into a psychological trap, making everyday life a cycle of craving and consumption. By creating habitual use, they ensured long-term dependence without overt coercion. The sugar industry's influence extended into governments and health organizations, often funding research and educational programs. Schools sometimes received sugar shipments or sponsored materials, making sugar seem necessary for growth and vitality. Public health campaigns often ignored sugar's addictive potential. The families were careful to appear benevolent while controlling the diet of nations. Their strategy wasn't just about taste, it was about manipulating desire and shaping behavior. Each generation grew up more dependent than the last, with habits passed down like cultural rituals. The science of sweetness was hidden behind smiles, slogans, and syrupy goodness. Tate and Lyle had mastered the art of subtle addiction, turning a commodity into a daily necessity. People didn't realize they were hooked until decades later when health problems became apparent. By the mid-20th century, the family's influence had reshaped global eating habits in ways no one fully understood. As the 20th century progressed, Tate and Lyle became central to the rise of processed foods. They supplied sugar to baking companies, snack producers, and eventually soft drink manufacturers. Sugar was no longer just for desserts. It was everywhere, hidden in bread, sauces, and ready-made meals. The families capitalized on convenience, turning busy lifestyles into a goldmine for sugar consumption. Marketing made it seem normal, healthy, and even essential to modern living. Governments, schools, and doctors often ignored the long-term consequences, while the families profited. Obesity, diabetes, and heart disease were increasing, but public awareness lagged behind. Tate and Lyle's influence extended to global food policy, trade agreements, and subsidies, ensuring that sugar remained cheap and accessible. Their products shaped cultural norms, making sweetness the default taste for generations. Advertising continued to portray sugar as fun, safe, and irresistible. Even as scientific evidence mounted, the family's brand loyalty insulated them from criticism. They diversified into artificial sweeteners and other ingredients, staying relevant as diets and tastes evolved. The global reach meant that countries once unfamiliar with refined sugar were now addicted. This ubiquity cemented sugar as a staple, not a treat. Children were the most vulnerable, conditioned from birth to crave sweets. Parents unknowingly reinforced habits, became part of the cycle. The family's marketing genius had normalized addiction without anyone noticing. Tate and Lyle products became cultural icons, symbols of convenience, tradition, and indulgence. They had redefined the human diet, embedding sugar in every meal. By the late 20th century, their empire was unchallenged, controlling both supply and desire. The world's dependence on sugar was complete, and the families had done it with precision, strategy, and patience. Behind the sweet empire was a growing health crisis that few were ready to acknowledge. The rise in obesity, diabetes, and tooth decay mirrored the global spread of Tate and Lyle products. Despite warnings from some scientists, the families used lobbying, sponsorships, and public relations to maintain a positive image. They framed sugar as natural, harmless, and even beneficial in small amounts. Governments were slow to act, influenced by the family's economic and political power. Marketing campaigns continued to target children, families, and schools, embedding sugar deeply into culture. Even health authorities often downplayed the dangers, focusing on fats or lifestyle choices instead. This allowed the families to profit while society paid the real cost in illness. Sugar's addictive properties meant that consumption increased automatically, creating a hidden public health disaster. Processed foods, sodas, and candies became daily staples, and sugar was almost impossible to avoid. The family's influence on scientific research ensured that studies critical of sugar were minimized or challenged. Media campaigns portrayed sugar as innocent fun, masking its dangers. Consumers trusted brands like Tate & Lyle, unaware of the subtle manipulation behind their favorite products. Advertising and packaging were designed to reinforce positive emotions, hiding the risk of addiction. As health issues mounted, the world slowly realized the hidden power of the sugar industry. Despite rising awareness, change was slow because habits were deeply ingrained. Children continued to be the most affected, creating a cycle that repeated each generation. The Tate and Lyle families had created a global system where sweetness was intertwined with daily life, pleasure, and culture. Their empire thrived on the gap between desire and awareness. By controlling perception, taste, and availability, they had shaped a global addiction that continues today. The Tate and Lyle empire was built not only on marketing and science, but also on colonial exploitation. They sourced vast quantities of sugar from colonies in the Caribbean, Africa, and India, relying on cheap labor and oppressive systems. Plantation workers endured harsh conditions, low pay, and long hours, producing sugar that would fuel the global addiction. The families profited immensely from these systems, turning human labor into a core part of their supply chain. Sugar was not just a commodity, it became a tool for economic dominance over colonies. Local populations were often left impoverished while the world consumed the products. The family's expansion into foreign markets coincided with the decline of colonial economies, allowing them to buy raw sugar cheaply. This global network ensured that Tate & Lyle could dominate the market and control supply chains. They invested in refining technologies in Britain, increasing efficiency and output while keeping costs low. Advertising portrayed sugar as wholesome, hiding the brutal labor behind it. Colonial governments were often complicit, benefiting from taxes and trade profits while ignoring human suffering. The family's influence extended into trade policies, tariffs, and monopolies, consolidating power at the expense of workers. Consumers in Europe and later North America rarely questioned the origins of their sugar. Most were unaware that each teaspoon was linked to exploitation thousands of miles away. The families created a system where ethics were ignored as long as profits soared. Sugar was positioned as a symbol of modern life, while injustice remained hidden. Their empire depended on maintaining both global dependence and ignorance. Each expansion strengthened the cycle of production, addiction, and profit. By the mid-20th century, Tate & Lyle controlled both sugar supply and cultural perception worldwide. Their legacy was a mix of convenience, wealth, and deep social cost. The Tate & Lyle families didn't just sell sugar. They also wielded political power. They understood that to maintain their empire, they had to influence governments and regulations. Lobbyists were employed to shape trade policies, tariffs, and food laws in their favor. Political connections ensured that sugar remained cheap and widely available, often at the expense of public health. The families donated to campaigns, funded research, and positioned themselves as pillars of society. Their philanthropy created a public image of benevolence, masking their behind-the-scenes control. When health studies suggested sugar was harmful, they quietly funded counter-research. This allowed them to delay regulation while continuing to expand markets. Policymakers were influenced directly or indirectly, often prioritizing economic growth over public well-being. Sugar subsidies, encouraged by lobbying, made the commodity more profitable and entrenched in diets worldwide. Schools, hospitals, and public institutions were subtly targeted to favor sugar consumption. Generations grew up with sugar as a staple, reinforced by government and corporate influence alike. The family's power extended into colonial administrations, ensuring a smooth supply chain and favorable trade conditions. Even global organizations sometimes received funding or partnerships, strengthening Tate & Lyle's reach. This influence ensured that the narrative around sugar remained positive for decades. Marketing, science, and politics were perfectly aligned to protect profits. The empire was a masterclass in soft power, shaping desire, policy, and perceptions simultaneously. Consumers unknowingly participated in a system designed to benefit the families. The world was addicted, and the families maintained control by steering both opinion and regulation. Their political strategy made resistance difficult and change slow. By embedding themselves in every layer of society, they guaranteed the longevity of the sugar empire. Tate & Lyle didn't just sell sugar, they created a culture around it. Sugar became part of celebrations, traditions, and daily rituals. Birthdays, holidays, and desserts revolved around sweetness, embedding the product in society's collective memory. Advertising reinforced these cultural norms, showing happy families enjoying sugar together. Recipes, cookbooks, and culinary schools promoted sugar as a fundamental ingredient, not an optional treat. Television and radio ads created nostalgia and desire simultaneously, making sugar inseparable from comfort and happiness. The families understood that culture shapes habit, and habit ensures consumption. Children grew up associating sugar with reward, fun, and love. Parents, influenced by these messages, reinforced these associations unknowingly. Schools provided opportunities for sugar exposure through snacks and treats. Even sports events, movies, and public gatherings featured sugary foods prominently. The normalization of sugar consumption made it invisible, hiding its addictive properties. Tate & Lyle became part of everyday life, not just a brand, but a symbol of prosperity and modernity.
Their products influenced taste preferences, teaching generations to prefer sweetness over natural flavors. The empire was not just economic, it was psychological and cultural. People didn't just consume sugar, they celebrated it, depended on it, and passed it to the next generation. Cultural reinforcement ensured that even when health concerns arose, sugar remained central to life. Habits formed in childhood persisted, cementing global addiction. By shaping culture, the families guaranteed long-term demand without overt coercion. Their genius lay in turning sugar from a product into an indispensable part of society. Through culture, marketing, and psychology, they achieved what few empires in history have: invisible control. The Tate and Lyle families were not immune to competition, but they handled rivals with ruthless strategy. They bought out smaller sugar companies, eliminating threats and consolidating power. Competitors who tried to challenge their prices often went bankrupt, unable to match their scale and efficiency. The families invested in advanced machinery and refined production methods to stay ahead. Branding became another battlefield, with logos and packaging designed to dominate store shelves. Advertising campaigns constantly reinforced their authority in the sugar market. They even influenced consumer perception, creating loyalty so strong that people rarely tried other brands. By the 1930s and 1940s, Tate and Lyle controlled most of the British sugar market. Their global reach also allowed them to secure key trade routes and suppliers. This consolidation made it almost impossible for new companies to enter the market. They leveraged economies of scale, ensuring that their sugar remained cheaper and more accessible. The families understood that market dominance was as much about perception as production. Advertising emphasized heritage, quality, and reliability, making the brands synonymous with sugar itself. They created scarcity in some regions while flooding others, managing supply to maximize both demand and profit. Strategic alliances with distributors and retailers further strengthened their control. The empire was no longer just two families running refineries. It was a multinational powerhouse shaping global consumption. Every merger and acquisition increased their influence over both product and culture. Competitors often underestimated the family's understanding of marketing psychology. Tate and Lyle didn't just compete, they absorbed, manipulated, and dominated. Their approach ensured that the sugar empire remained unchallenged for decades.
The family that invented organized crime. The Genovese family did not become the most powerful crime family in America overnight, and this slow rise is exactly what made them so dangerous. They learned early that organized crime was not about loud violence, but quiet control. In the crowded streets of early 1900s New York, the family discovered a simple truth: people fear bullets, but they obey money. The Genovese leaders realized that fear only works for a moment, but influence lasts generations. Their first operations were small and almost invisible, which was the entire point. While other gangs fought loudly in the streets, the Genovese family built relationships with businesses, politicians, and even police officers who could be bought for the right price. They understood that every institution has a weak spot waiting to be exploited. Their genius was recognizing that crime did not need to hide in the shadows if it could own the shadows. The family slowly constructed a network so big and so loyal that outsiders barely noticed it forming. Every neighborhood they touched became dependent on them for protection, loans, or simple survival. By the time rivals realized what was happening, the Genovese family has spread like a quiet storm. They built their empire not just with intimidation, but with strategy. They avoided drawing attention to themselves, which made them even more attractive to criminals seeking stability. Their early rise became a blueprint replicated by other mafia groups for decades. The Genovese family created a system where fear and respect walked hand in hand. Their leaders mastered the art of making impossible deals look normal. This patience made them unlike any other crime family in New York. Their power did not rely on being seen, but on being felt everywhere. And by understanding how chaos could benefit them, the Genovese family became the silent architects of American organized crime. Every great criminal empire has one figure who takes it from chaos to structure, and for the Genovese family, that man was Charles Lucky Luciano. Before Luciano, the mafia in America was messy, emotional, and violent in ways that killed opportunity. He believed crime should be a business, not a street brawl.
He started by removing old leaders who refused to modernize, showing that evolution sometimes requires blood. Luciano understood the power of cooperation, so he created something the mafia had never seen before, a criminal board of directors called the Commission. This structure allowed major crime families to negotiate without killing each other, which made the Genovese family even stronger. Under his leadership, crime became industrial. Racketeering became a steady revenue source, while gambling and prostitution expanded under strict discipline. Luciano also forged alliances with Jewish and Irish gangsters, something traditional mobsters saw as betrayal. He saw it as strategy. His willingness to break old rules allowed the Genovese family to dominate in areas others overlooked. Even when law enforcement finally caught him, his influence did not disappear. From prison, and even after deportation to Italy, Luciano continued shaping mafia operations with quiet authority. His mind was the foundation of modern organized crime. The Genovese family learned from him that stability creates longevity. His biggest innovation was teaching the mafia to remain invisible. Luciano believed power meant never needing to prove anything. His systems allowed the family to thrive long after he lost direct control. And even today, his fingerprints remain on the structure of American organized crime. As the Genovese family expanded, they realized that the greatest profits came from the places no one paid attention to. They infiltrated unions, docks, trucking companies, and the construction industry, turning essential city operations into private ATMs. Their control over these industries allowed them to decide which companies succeeded and which ones failed. Every contract, every shipment, every deal came with a hidden tax paid to the family. This system generated millions while keeping their hands clean. By controlling unions, they gained leverage over politicians who feared strikes and disruptions. This influence made the family seem untouchable. Their empire grew beneath the surface like a carefully managed disease. Even businesses that refused to cooperate eventually discovered that their workers would not show up or their supplies mysteriously vanished. The Genovese family understood the basic principle of power. Choke what people depend on and they will bow. Their low-profile operations made law enforcement struggle to prove anything. They used intimidation sparingly, choosing subtle threats instead of reckless violence. These tactics made rivals fear them without ever seeing them act. The family built a reputation for being both generous and terrifying. They funded political campaigns, organized community events, and handed out money when necessary. People liked them because they solved problems no one else could. But behind that helpful facade existed an empire fueled by extortion and manipulation. Their quiet dominance allowed them to rule New York without needing headlines. And by perfecting this method, the Genovese family became the blueprint for organized crime's corporate future. The Genovese family discovered early that fear could be shaped into a profitable product if used carefully. They learned not to threaten people loudly, but to create an environment where no one wanted to test their limits. Business owners in New York understood that refusing the family was not just a risky decision, but a life-changing one. The family rarely needed to raise their voices because their reputation handled the hard work for them. Each neighborhood quickly developed unspoken rules about how to behave around their associates. Fear became a service the family provided, keeping outsiders from interfering with local operations. Their enforcers did not roam the streets wildly. They played the role of silent guardians who only acted when necessary. This approach made the family appear disciplined compared to other mobs that indulged in chaotic violence. When someone crossed a boundary, the response was swift but calm, which made the punishment feel even heavier. People feared the Genovese family because they never acted out of emotion, only out of business necessity. That cold professionalism made them seem more like a corporation than a gang. The family used fear as a tool to maintain order, not chaos. Every shop owner who paid protection money viewed it as insurance rather than extortion. Even politicians quietly admitted that life was easier with the family controlling the streets. Their influence kept small-time criminals in line and prevented rival gangs from sparking wars. In a strange way, the Genovese family became a stabilizing force in an unstable city. They offered safety at a price, and most people decided the price was worth it. Through fear, the family built a reliable income stream that funded larger criminal ventures. And by mastering this delicate balance, they transformed intimidation into a sustainable business model.